Hey everybody, welcome to my 2018 Q&A video. I intended to do this a little bit earlier in the year, but I'm just now getting around to doing it. I solicited questions from you guys on a couple different videos. I have answered most of them here. There were a couple ones that were looked like they were trolling, so I just ignored those. I edited a couple of them for very light grammar adjustments, but I did not trim anybody's actual questions down. So without any further ado, here they are. If you have any more questions, feel free to ask them in the comments section. James asks, are you planning or have you tried Cemu on the Masher Pro? I've been playing with it and it runs really well. Would like to hear your review. So I did a video a while back about the Dolphin emulator. I haven't done much with Cemu on the Masher Pro. I have tried it on my own computer. I got Zelda Breath of the Wild on my Switch, and then I wanted to see kind of how that would compare to the Cemu version. So I've done that, but I haven't really done anything else with it. If there's a lot of interest, I could try Cemu on the Masher Pro, but I don't currently have any plans to. A couple people asked this question, and this was asked before I did my last video about putting the Xeon into the Masher, so I've summarized them all in Shiraz's question. So Shiraz asks, do you think upgrading to the X3440 is a good idea? I feel like this is the way to go since games are starting to tax out your i5 750. I hope you make that upgrade since $16 might not be a big deal considering you also get hyper-threading, basically the same as an i7, 870, etc. So what I've decided to do, and this was asked before I actually did that video, so he didn't know I was going to do this, but what I've decided to do, for anyone who doesn't know, is I bought a Xeon X3440 and I put it into the Masher to try it out, because it works on the same exact socket, it's completely compatible with everything else in the machine, and the nice part is it's only $16 and it has hyper-threading. So that did make a pretty significant difference in a lot of games at 1080p. It was a little bit slower in some, and I think that's because I'm running at 300 megahertz lower than the i5 750 in the Masher. This Xeon cannot overclock as far on the super cheap cooler that the Masher has. So I tried the Xeon and I was curious what you guys thought, given that it's worth the same exact amount as the i5 750 in the Masher. Should I just basically do a trade? It's like a no cost upgrade and you get hyper threading and the CPU will last a little bit longer. And I got a lot of split opinions. So what I've decided to do, and this was actually a suggestion from a couple people in the comments, is I'm going to keep the Xeon in the Masher Pro, and then I'm going to disable hyper-threading for the regular Masher videos. So the regular Masher hardware configuration will stay exactly the same, and then the Masher Pro, since that's more of an experiment in upgrading, that will have the Xeon with all of the cores unlocked. So for anyone who doesn't know, the i5 750 and the Xeon X3440, like if you added hyper-threading, they're pretty much the exact same processor. Like there really isn't any difference. There's no advantage I'm getting by leaving the Xeon in for the Masher and then disabling hyper-threading. It's the exact same thing. But some of you might be wondering, what am I going to do since the Xeon is clocked lower? Well, please don't get mad, but I've bought a CyroRig C7 CPU cooler, which is a much better CPU cooler, and I've installed that. And I'm not going to use that to cheat at all. I'm not going to use that to run higher clock speeds than I could normally. I only bought that so that I could run the Xeon at the Masher's speed of 3.7 gigahertz with hyper-threading disabled for Masher videos, and then I'll clock it back down to the 3.4 gigahertz for Masher Pro videos. So I'm not going to overclock anything any farther than I could normally, so I'm not using it to get any performance advantage. It's just so I can take this Xeon and run it as an i5 750 for some videos, and then run it as the full hyper-threaded Xeon for the others. So hopefully that makes sense. Ask me if you want any follow-up questions answered. Steel N7 asks, hey Jeremiah, a real quick one. What are you planning to do with your i7 4790K CPU if they don't release a proper BIOS patch for Spectre? Are you going to upgrade to a newer CPU or keep yours? I think this question will be interesting for everybody whose CPU will not get the update. So yeah, it looks like my CPU is not getting the Spectre patch for the security vulnerabilities that Intel has now told us about. Right now, I'm planning on keeping it. I'm curious to see what the actual security implications are going to be. I don't want to make a several $100 decision based off of what might just be rabble-rousing, which is a slightly ignorant thing to say, I realize, but I'm curious to see what's actually going to happen to the CPUs that don't get the Spectre patch. Right now, my assumption is not that much because there's probably plenty of other security vulnerabilities out there that my hardware already has that I don't know about and I'm not being exploited on. But if it looks like there is a significant security risk, then of course the value of these processors are going to drop. And then I probably wouldn't sell it. I'd probably just move it into service on a rig that has no private information on it, like maybe my Plex server or something. Then I would buy a different CPU for myself. Squiggly Furball asks, do you think you can do Fortnite on the Masher? It doesn't have to be Save the World, just PvP. It's also free. I did Fortnite on the Masher Pro in the Xbox One X versus Masher Pro launch video I did a couple months ago. If you would like to see me test Fortnite on the regular Masher, just leave a comment below and let me know. Or like one person leave a comment, everybody vote it up. And if there's a lot of interest, yeah, I'll do one. Madalena asks, what do you think is the most graphically impressive game? Now, this is a little bit hard to answer because there's a lot of different ways to consider graphics to be good. Like you could have just a super beautiful art style, like many people would consider Zelda Breath of the Wild to have an amazing art style. But of course, you wouldn't look at it and say, well, it's got the best reflections and it's got the most detailed textures and everything, because of course it doesn't. But it's a beautiful game in its own right because of that art style. And then you could look at The Witcher 3 and say, like, that's got the most beautiful hair in any video game ever. I don't know if it does, but let's say it's got the most beautiful hair. And it has some of the prettiest open worlds, like weather and everything else. So maybe that's the most graphically impressive game. And then you could have like Project Cars 2 or Forza 7 or one of these super realistic racing games that's incredibly graphically intense, but in a very, very specific way. Like in a racing game, the spectators will look like garbage and the stands look like garbage, but the cars and the tracks look amazing. So to answer your question, what do I think is the most graphically impressive game? I don't know if I can just pick one, but I've got a couple that I'd put up there. I think The Witcher 3 is one of the best looking games. If you just show it to somebody with everything maxed out at 4K, I think people will be incredibly impressed by how that game looks for years to come. So I think that's one of the best looking ones. I think Sea of Thieves is actually incredibly impressive with the sea. I've been playing that a lot recently, and while the rest of it's a pretty cartoonish art style that probably doesn't look that great, like if you're strictly comparing it against realistic looking games, I think that the sea is probably the best looking sea I've seen in a game, so that's up there. Project Cars, I think still to this day, has some of the best looking cars in any video game. That's probably most of them. I think Doom is one of the best looking shooters I've ever played. So some combination of all of those maybe. I mean, but it's hard though. It really depends what things you consider to be really good looking. Like Rise of the Tomb Raider probably doesn't have the absolute best looking anything, but taken as a whole, it's one of the best looking games I've ever seen. So it's a little bit of a hard conversation to have. Hopefully it doesn't sound like I'm like ducking out of an answer, but I think there's a lot of really, really impressive looking games, and I don't think I can pick just one. Madalena has a second question. Hey, what is your favorite game of all time or favorite games of all time, since some people can't figure out what their one favorite game is? I'm one of those people. I don't have one single favorite game, but some of my favorite games that would be at the absolute top of my list would be The Witcher 3, Age of Empires 2, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, and Uncharted 4 and The Last of Us. Simon asks, what do you think about the Ryzen lineup so far? I think AMD is back in a big way when it comes to CPUs. I think the Ryzen lineup is extremely impressive. I think the per-core performance is good enough that most people don't need an Intel for gaming anymore unless you're going with like an 144 Hz or 120 Hz display. Their Intel still has a pretty decided advantage. But for most people, a Ryzen processor is going to be good enough. And it's going to be very, very good for the money for anything productivity related. And Intel has fired back with some very impressive under $200 processors, but I still think especially in the $100 to $150 range and in the $300 to $600 range, I think Ryzen is probably the way to go. And I am strongly considering my next processor upgrade being a Ryzen or a Threadripper Ryzen build. Rayhan asks, so you recently decided to do away with the podcast. That's the Casual Shenanigans Gaming Podcast. In case you don't know, we ended it at 220 episodes just a few weeks ago. I would be sad if it would stop, but do you have the same plans for your Potato Masher series? No, I do not. I have no immediate plans to end the series at any time in the near future. Like I plan on doing this for a while, as long as people enjoy watching it and the content at least gets a few views so I can justify spending all the money on the games. I'm still here. I'm still doing it. Sketchy Pancake asks, what GPU, CPU, RAM combo are you thinking about using in the Potato Masher X? I'm not thinking about making a Potato Masher X right now because the Masher Pro is comparing very well against the Xbox One X. So if it does slip pretty far behind, I told you guys I would make another build for the same price as whatever the X1X is selling for then. But as of right now, I think I'm just going to stick with the Masher Pro. I don't see any reason to build something else. Nihai Park asks, this question is somewhat outdated, but I was curious, since you only recently got a 4K 60 capture card and you used a 1080p 60 capture card in the past, How were you capturing 4K footage in the past? Were you simply playing games in 1080p, downsampled from 4K using NVIDIA's DSR? And if so, does DSR and 4K have similar performance? So DSR, if you don't know, is NVIDIA's dynamic super resolution. It's where you tell a game that your computer supports higher resolutions than it does. So you can render at higher resolutions, display at your native resolution, and then you can use the benefits of super sampling to make your game look better. Yes, that's how I was doing it in the past. I was using NVIDIA's DSR. And there is zero performance difference between DSR and gaming at that native resolution. The only limitation there was my capture resolution was limited to 1080p 60. As far as the game knows, it's playing the game at that resolution on a computer that supports that resolution. Like, that's what DSR does and AMD's virtual super resolution do. There is no difference as far as the game is concerned. Skilled Rebuilds asks, do you think HDR should be more prevalent in games to drive HDR monitor sales to mainstream? That's interesting. So a lot of console games are supporting HDR now, and quite a few PC games are, but not quite as much. Like, the number's growing, but it's not growing as fast as I'd like it to. And HDR monitors for computers are just starting to hit the mainstream. So I think HDR is going to be around for a long time. Like, it doesn't seem to be a gimmick like 3D when it comes to televisions. It seems to be where it's just going to be built into every 4K TV to some degree, and everybody will support it, and eventually all content will be HDR. So I think computer monitors are going to become more and more common that support HDR, and I don't think it'll be a big deal. But one important thing to keep in mind is that supporting HDR doesn't mean you're having a great HDR experience, because for a proper HDR experience, you need to hit about 1,000 nits of brightness at the brightest spot in your screen. And most even good 4K HDR TVs right now can't come anywhere close to that. I've got a Samsung KS8000, which is regarded to be one of the better mid-range to budget 4K TVs out there. And it can hit, I think, a maximum of like 500 nits of brightness. And it does look really good in games, but it's not like you're getting the full HDR experience in any consumer level stuff right now, except for the very highest end. So HDR itself has a way to go, and I think computers will catch up to consoles and movies when it comes to HDR over the next couple years. Drearier Spider asks, does the release of Raven Ridge get you excited for the next generation of consoles since they're both system on chips? I'm not much of a console fan myself, but it's nice to see entry-level hardware become more capable of providing a good experience, and Raven Ridge solves the CPU limitations of the AM3 era processors. I think Raven Ridge is great. I would temper my excitement though, because yes, it's much more powerful than the CPUs or the processors that are being used in the Xbox and the PlayStation 4. But those were still powerful in their time too. They're just very, very outdated now. They're outdated enough that a 9-year-old quad core is pretty competitive with them, or even better. So I think Raven Ridge is great, but by the time the next consoles come out, they'll probably be using something that's way faster than the last gen, but still quite a bit slower than consumer grade quad cores or hexacores or whatever is the most common thing in a couple years when the new consoles come out. So I think you're still going to have that limitation for a long time. A lot of console players don't seem to really care about gaming at 60 FPS. Plenty of people do, but it doesn't seem to be something where the sales of the console are actually affected if it can't hit 60 FPS. It appears to just be like a nice bonus when it comes to actually affecting consumer behavior. So I don't think manufacturers are going to want to spend extra on the CPUs to guarantee 60 FPS in most games, because you can't really, because as soon as you make a more powerful processor, they'll just stress it more. So, I mean, it's like a battle you can never win with a system you can't upgrade. So I honestly don't think it's going to be much different the next generation, if I'm being honest. What microphone do you use to record your voiceovers and commentary? Well, I'm using a Audio-Technica 875R mini shotgun condenser microphone. I like that because it doesn't pick up my mechanical keyboard, and I can pull it a little farther away from my mouth, and it still has a really good pickup. It's got a very tight cone pickup, and it sounds pretty good. I've had a bunch of different mics though. So if you've been watching me for a few years, you've probably heard me go through 3 or 4 different mics. And I don't think this is the last one I'm going to use, but I do like it. I think it sounds really good. If you are curious, I've got a link to it in the description, along with the Behringer USB interface I use to actually get the sound into the computer and provide phantom power for the microphone. Fat MP1 asks, what game changed you the most? That's an interesting question, because similar to the graphics discussion, it depends on what you consider to be changing me, like change in what area. The original Modern Warfare was the first game that really got me into multiplayer gaming over the internet, and that became a huge part of my life, and I do more multiplayer gaming now than I do single player gaming. So in a sense, that was one of the most significant games as far as changing me. DayZ is responsible for most of my current friendships with people I talk to on a regular basis. So you could say DayZ changed me the most. Through that, I met my best friends. That's the reason I have the job I have now, is through connections I made and friends I made while playing DayZ. So you could make a good case that DayZ changed me the most. When it comes to cinematic storytelling and just a quality artistic experience, probably The Witcher 3 or maybe The Last of Us. Chase asks, what makes you keep going when doing YouTube? How do you keep interest? Well, it's not the money, I'll tell you that. So YouTube is a hobby. So sometimes I am in the mood to do a whole lot of YouTube. Other times I'm not in the mood to do much with it, or life is really busy and I can't fit as much of it in. Like YouTube comes behind actually gaming with my friends and my job, of course, and my wife and, the more important things in my life. But I try to do YouTube whenever I can fit it in. Like I schedule at least a couple sessions each week to work on something. Sometimes I work for a couple weeks and only make one video. And then other times I make 1 or 2 videos a week if I've got a lot of different things going on. Like I don't follow a set production schedule just because YouTube is one piece of a really, really busy life that I've made for myself. So I keep interest in it by I work on it when I'm interested and I don't work on it when I'm not interested. And I know that's not really that interesting of an answer, but it's the truth. Like I don't want it to feel like a chore or a job, because it's not a job. Like it pays for itself, but that's about it. So I'm not relying on it for money. I do it because I like helping and educating people. And I do it because I like interacting with everybody who enjoys watching my content. So I do it for those reasons, and I do it as much as I feel like doing it. Which one should I buy, PS4 Pro or Xbox One S? I don't really know why you're shopping the PS4 Pro against the Xbox One S. I would think you'd be shopping the PS4 Pro against the Xbox One X. But I don't know enough about your preferences to be able to answer this question. I'm sorry. PS4 Pro is going to have a better first-party lineup by most people's standards. It really depends on what franchises you're interested in. The Xbox One S is going to have a better functionality in the rest of your ecosystem if you also have like a Windows 10 PC or play a lot of Microsoft titles. So I don't know. I mean, if you could afford it, get both over time. That's probably the best answer. But if I had to pick one and I played a lot of single player games, I'd probably get a PS4 Pro. Yodistic asks, your favorite movie and video game from 2017? For game, I'm probably going to go with Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice for a single-player game, and PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds or Ghost Recon Wildlands for multiplayer game. For movies, it's another thing where there's so many good ones. I don't know if I can pick just one, but I loved Dunkirk, Baby Driver, Wonder Woman, Thor Ragnarok, probably a couple others. La La Land was really good, so I liked all those. James asks, any chance of you doing playthroughs? I'd love to watch your playthrough. I don't know that you would, James. I don't think I'm very interesting to watch play games, and I'm also not super good at most games. I don't really like talking while I'm gaming unless I'm playing a multiplayer game with friends, and I don't really feel like any of my Let's Plays in the past have been that interesting, but you're welcome to go back to my old videos and see if there's any in there that you like. But yeah, honestly, I just don't think I'd be that interesting to watch play a game, and I don't want to make a bunch of mediocre content. Baller Workplace asks, can you make another AC Origins video on the Masher? Got a few patches since you last reviewed it. Thank you for making this amazing content. You're helping budget gamers a lot. I'm glad you enjoy the content. Thanks for watching. I have been playing Assassin's Creed Origins off and on for the past couple months, and it doesn't seem like it runs a lot better to me. But if there's a consensus in the comments that it is a lot better for a lot of people, yeah, I'll revisit it. Devilijo, not really sure how to pronounce that. Is the GTX 1050 better than the 760 on this rig? The GTX 1050 and the 760 are very, very similar. I think it probably is going to come down to what games you're playing. The 1050 will probably have a couple advantages in games that take advantage of a newer architecture. But the 1050 is basically a GTX 950, which is basically a little bit better version of a GTX 760. So they're not that different from each other. Nadir asks, can you stream your testing procedure? Much like me doing playthroughs, that is probably way more boring than you think it is, and you don't want to watch it. It's mostly going to be me trying things in an options menu and then playing around for a minute and then trying something else and then playing around for a minute and then trying something else and then playing around for a minute and then finally playing like an hour or two of a game while making notes and stopping things at certain sections. So it'd be like the most boring Let's Play you've ever seen, and it takes place across 2 different computers, so I can't really show the whole procedure unless I'm doing a lot of switching between monitors. And to be honest, I don't think there's that much demand there. Like, I doubt most people are clamoring to see that, and I'd probably just be spending a lot of extra time to be super, super boring, if I'm being honest. JC Camaro asks, seeing as the Xbox One and PS4 will be 5 years old this coming fall, the next generation of consoles are likely not that far away, maybe 2019, 2020. Do you think the existence of the PS4 Pro and Xbox One X will make it more difficult for consumers to justify purchasing another system so early, since even the Pro would only be 3 years old in 2019? I don't think so. I think if they announced the Xbox 2 or whatever and the PS5 in 2020, I think plenty of people would line up on day one to buy them because they'd assume like this is the next generational leap where we expect to see not just better graphics like you see with the Xbox One X and the PS4 Pro, not just an Ultra HD Blu-ray drive, not just those features, but actual technological leaps in ways that we haven't seen before. Typically, console generations, there's more technology jumps than just raw power. So I think if that's the case, I think plenty of people will be fine buying them. If not, if it's really just like a more powerful Xbox One X and a PS5 and they're not immediately backwards compatible with the whole previous libraries, I think they'd probably sell a little bit slower, but it's hard to say. I mean, everybody thought that the Xbox 360 and the PS3 had a very strong generation and we were getting close to the end of consoles. And then the Xbox One and the PS4 have outsold the 360 and the PS3 year for year the entire time they've been out. So it's really hard to tell what'll happen. Personally, I'm hoping for the next Xbox One and the PS5 to be backwards compatible and to be like the next jump after the Xbox One X and the PS4 Pro, respectively. So, the Xbox 2 or whatever would be the same to the X as the X is to the regular Xbox One, and the same thing with a PS4 Pro. And I'd like the generational lines to be blurred a little bit so people could just upgrade their machine when they feel like it's too old or not playing games the way they want, and they could stick with whatever games they wanted to play. So it'd be nice if you could still be buying newer games for your PS4 for a few years, even if the resolution gets down to like 720 or something. Like, even if it looks bad, it'd be nice if they can support it longer, like some games do with like the Xbox 360 and the PS3. And then for everybody else, you have the option of upgrading to a better system that's going to run everything really well and look really well. So I think if they announced them this year, which nobody's going to, I think that'd be way too soon. I think 2019 would probably be too soon. I think 2020 is a good year. I think it makes sense. It'd be a pretty long generation, but I think everybody would be fine with it. And, at that point, it would only be 3 years for the Xbox One X and 4 years for the PS4 Pro. And that's a pretty good amount of time. I think a lot of people would be ready to upgrade at that point. All right, everybody. Thanks for coming out and watching the video. I hope it's been at least somewhat interesting. I like doing these, but of course, I'm always willing to talk to you guys in the comment section if you have comments about a particular video or something else I'm doing. Up next is probably going to be Final Fantasy 15 on the Masher and the Masher Pro versus the PS4 and the Xbox One X. And then I've got a couple other things planned for the near future. There's a bunch of games releasing. There's a whole stack of games I've recorded footage for. I just need to make the reviews for. So I'm looking forward to it. I hope you guys are enjoying everything I'm making. Let me know if you have any suggestions, and I'll see you next time.